have your attention again, we'll reassemble our thoughts and get back to stories of Iowa. As I hinted, culture in Iowa, and yes, we have culture in Iowa, I think, personally, gets maligned. And disappointedly so. I think sometimes we're our own worst enemy because we apologize. And I found that in my travel with Iowans, for some reason or other, and maybe it's just the crowd I hang around with, they tend to apologize for being from Iowa. And I always question why. Because while I didn't start out here, I will end up here. And I'm not going anywhere. Iowa is it, and it with a capital I and T. So let's talk for a little bit with our panelists and listen to their stories about Iowa's culture. Why is it, John, why is it that some Iowans take freedom with Iowa's culture?
I was on a radio show once. Michael Feldman does this radio show once a week on public radio called What Do You Know? And they were in Ames at C.Y. Stevens, and I was a guest, and the first question was, he said, tell me about Iowa, John. He said, what's the zen of Iowa? I said, I don't know. And I thought the whole thing was going to completely collapse, but we had a nice talk. But I knew Jim Friedman pretty well. He was president of the University of Iowa for several years, and it drove him crazy that Iowans tend to do what you just described, apologize for being here. Well, I'm from Iowa, and it drove him nuts because he said the culture here, the devotion to place is here, the intellectual power is here. And I think he was from Pennsylvania. I can't remember exactly. He went off to become president of Dartmouth. But he said you don't see that elsewhere, and it really bothered him. In fact, I wrote a piece for the Register about that. Iowans, while we apologize, we tend to think that, well, we're exceptional. There's an Iowa exceptionalism that we tend to feel. I don't believe it, quite honestly. I think people in Kansas feel the same way about Kansas, and I think people in Texas certainly feel that way about Texas, and South Carolina, and Oregon, and New Hampshire, and with reason. I think there is an American exceptionalism, and we all contribute to that. I'm kind of getting away from your question there, but Iowans, I think, are proud of where they live. I think we educate our kids well and give them a chance to succeed. A lot of us leave and come back. I think that's fine. I gave a speech once to a group of, I don't know if they're graduating seniors or some high school kids. And I said, the governor and your mom and dad would not like what I'm about to tell you. When you graduate from high school or college, go somewhere else for a while. Get out of here. Find out what this world is like. And then you're going to find out what it's like somewhere. And you might like that, and you might stay. Or you very good chance you'll come back. But you'll be a better person for it, and a better rounded person for it. So maybe it's heresy to say that, in my opinion, there is no Iowa exceptionalism, but I believe that. I think it's an exceptional state. I live here. I choose to live here. A couple of months from now, I'll wonder why I chose to live here. But that was a very meandering answer to your, possibly non-answer to your question. But
Actually, I had crossed weather off the list because I just walked outside during the break, and we've got nothing to complain about today. And in about an hour, we'll be out there to enjoy some of it. Morgan?
Well, as John was talking, I kind of had thought I might say one thing, but something else occurred to me, and that is that he said, he'd say to young people, go out and see the world and then come back. Well, I have two daughters. One is 37 and the other is 33, and they really went far. One married a Dutchman and lives in Amsterdam, and the other married a Turk and lives in Istanbul, Turkey. And I have 5 grandchildren spread across the world. But one of the things that interested me just enormously is when I go to Amsterdam and I am around my daughter's friends, and they're very educated, interesting people, and they always want to get me aside, and they say, there is something about Jessica. She's this kind of approachable person. She has an interest in me. She's the only person who brought me food when my mother died. And they just say all these things, and I'm thinking, Iowa, 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 Iowa. And it happens to me almost every time I go visit. So I do believe there is something in our culture that does make us reach out to help other people, a real interest in helping other people. I think it makes us feel good. Maybe it is making up for something of an inferiority complex that we sort of have, but for whatever reason, it makes us look really good. And I want to tell one brief story. There's a children's program on public television called Shining Time Station, and this Thomas the Tank Engine is the star of it, and it's just a railroad car, And they, every once in a while, they bring an engine in that's the real Thomas the Tank Engine. And we did a story about it once. They were going to have the engine there for 2 weekends in a row. And there was a man from Wisconsin who was the person who brought that group here. And there were 8,000 people who went to this over 2 weekends. There were 84 Iowa volunteers who were organizing this whole thing. And when I interviewed the man afterwards, he said, what is it about this state? He said, I do this all over. I have never had anything so well run, people so enthusiastic, asking me if there's anything else they can do, taking care of me. He said, this is an incredible place. And I just said, you have no idea how incredible it is. So when I think of the Iowa culture, to me it's a demeanor, and as I say, maybe it is overcompensating for a certain inferiority complex that we feel, but it doesn't matter, because the end result is Iowans do a lot of good if they're in Amsterdam or Des Moines.
Cary.
Well, as I mentioned, I grew up in Missouri in a suburb of St. Louis, and when I was a kid, it was a town of 10,000 people, 20 miles from St. Louis. Now it's just part of a great big, metro area. My town, my parents, my church, my school gave me a great send-off and preparation for the world that I'm not sure everybody still gets today. And I always thought Missouri and Iowa were, a lot alike. We share the border, we look alike, sound alike. And for the longest of times, when I came here 30 years ago, I really wanted to go back to Missouri because it was my home state. I wanted to be a success in my hometown. I'd send tapes and, nothing happened. And so some of that motherly advice, was grow where you're planted. So that's what I tried to do. And the longer I've been here, the less I wanted to go back to Missouri to live. It's, nice place to visit. I have family members, but this, became home. And early in the game, in the 70s, when we were bringing Vietnam refugees, Southeast Iowa, or Asia refugees, Governor Ray had a big hand in that. I thought, how great is that, Tolerance. This state is known for tolerance, and we've seen that in more recent days. Regardless of what you may think of the President of the United States, I think he's a pretty good guy. We gave him his start. Without Iowa, there's no President Obama. We feed the world. What's there to be embarrassed about that? So like I said, the longer I've been here and then the more people I've talked to, and I used to not really have a description, of what I did or do. I told stories, and when I married my wife 8 years ago, she said, you honor people. And she said, you tell their stories, and it's mostly about average Iowans, and the old thing of showing that the whole world isn't going to heck in a handbasket. And Iowa is one of those places, and like I said, I'm proud to be here, and you all have convinced me it's a pretty good place.
Dorothy?
This is something for a long time that I've tried to struggle with. What is the culture of Iowa? What really is the essence of Iowa? One of the first terms that comes to me is the term middle land. I first heard Peter Harstead, who was at the State Historical Society in Iowa City, use that term. And I thought, what an appropriate description of Iowa. Physically, we're in the middle of the country. I think culturally, we're pretty much in the center. Iowa doesn't have a lot of extremes, one way or the other. Politically, we're supposed to be, maybe we're different politically in that we're supposed to be squeaky clean politically. And maybe that differs quite a bit from some places. I think Iowans have some wonderful tendencies, some wonderful characteristics. I think Iowans are centered. I think they're rooted. And oftentimes that rootedness goes back to a small town. The question, or the point that John raised, Iowans being different, having deference, and I see that so often. I'm retired now, but in my classes that I was taking, these young people, particularly from the small towns and the farms, they were so smart, and they didn't know they were so smart. They had a good, solid public education. And they wrote well. They used the right English. And they were simply impressive. I often think of a comment made by a professor at the University of Iowa, Linda Kerber, who was a New Yorker. And she wrote one time that New Yorkers think Iowans are dull because they don't interrupt you all the time. But I think that's really a very nice quality to have. And I think Iowans have that in terms of, I think, a certain sense of decorum. Just quickly, a couple of other points. I think we are so fortunate here to have the public system of education that we have. I think it just goes to the heart and the root of who we are and these generations of people that we are producing, so to speak. And I have to laugh. Maybe I'm so high on Iowa because I come from South Dakota. And I love South Dakota, but Iowa by comparison is really quite different. I think Iowans have tremendous characteristics, and I think they add a certain amount of stability for the whole country.
Thank you, Dorothy. As I forewarned you prior to the break about Iowa's culture, I'm going to also issue this invitation to our panelists before we wrap up this afternoon that I am going to get to that question about the big finish. If there's something that we didn't have that I didn't lead you into, a tall tale, some pithy advice, something along that line, so you maybe, while you're off and not answering, you maybe mull that around in your mind. We here have traveled to West Branch, those of you that don't live here. There are a lot of exciting places around the state of Iowa. And I would like to ask our panelists, if they could, to name one or two of the most exciting places they've ever been in the state of Iowa. Morgan raises her eyebrows and says, who, me?
She's been everywhere.
Well, and this place will surprise you because, let me back up first and say that I'm claustrophobic. And one day, one of the producers called me and said, I want to know if you'd like to go with me to Coldwater Cave near Decorah. And I said, oh, you mean go in the cave? And he said, well, yeah, we got the Iowa Speleological Society is mapping Coldwater Cave, and we'd like you to do the interviews. And I said, well, how do you get into the cave? And he said, oh, well, I'll find out. Well, the weeks kept going by, and they kept making plans for this, and finally I said, Marlon, how do you get in this cave? He said, well, there's this 90-foot shaft that's 36 inches in diameter, and there's a ladder. And I said, well, then I'm not going. And he said, well, but would you just come do the interviews? And I said, yes, but I am not going down. So anyway, we went to this field. There's nothing there but a shed. And you go in and here are all these people in wetsuits with helmets with lights and everything, you know, and so they got their equipment. The cameraman got his camera, and he's going down this shaft, and just looking down it made me break into a sweat. And so one of the members of the Speleological Society stayed up there with me, and I just sat there very quietly, feeling very guilty that I hadn't gone down into the cave. And he said, you know, I really think you could do this. And I said, no, I really couldn't. And he said, no, I really think you could. He said, if you just look straight at the rungs of the ladder and count them, don't look up, don't look down, just count them, and then you'll get down there. He said, I'll go down first. If you panic, I'll push you back up. And he said, I think you can do this. And I was just grasping at excuses not to go down in Coldwater Cave. And I said, well, do very many women go down there? And he said, my mother went last week, and she's 76. And I said, get the wetsuit. So I put on my wetsuit and my little helmet, and I counted the rungs, and I got down there, and it was the best thing I ever did in my whole life, because it's big enough for a freight train to go through it. It has a cold water stream of 46 degrees, constant temperature. And with a wetsuit, you warm up immediately. I had no idea how amazing a wetsuit is. There were formations that I'd never seen, straw-like formations, formations that looked like bacon. There were stalactites and stalagmites and fossils. And we turned off our lights on our helmets, and it was complete and utter darkness like I'd never experienced in my life. We spent 4 hours in that cave, and it was the most exciting thing. And then at the end, when we were all through, I went back to my hotel room and I called my husband. I said, I went down in the cave. And he said, you did not. And I said, yes, I did. And he said, well, that is really big news.
Similar but different. It's not an exciting place, but like her, it's an exciting thing I did, and one of the more famous things that I did. I went to Wings over Waterloo, which was an air show they had several years. And they offered reporters participatory things to do, and one was to fly with the Blue Angels Navy jet, airplanes, and I went, no, sorry, I can't do that, because I'd fill up the bag, So they said, well, we got this other thing you can do, and you can ride on top of a biplane, and I went, yeah, right. And kind of like you, I like, no. We'll go take pictures of it, and I'll interview the people and all that. Well, back in the day, Gary Sarnoff was the feature reporter for Channel 7 out of Waterloo. He's 6'2", skinny as a rail, red hair. And they offered him to go on the ride on the wing of the airplane, and he went, oh, I'm too tall, I don't fit in the harness. Yeah, all right. And they offered me, and I don't know why. I was kind of like you. It's like, I just don't do stuff like this. So I decided, okay. So they strap you up in a harness and then a belt, and you got goggles and aviator's cap on, like the old with the flaps and everything. And then there are like guy wires, and you are on the top of this 1944 Stearman biplane. And then I had that last minute, like, do you really want to do this? And I went, let's go, And I've got a microphone, photographers are on the ground, photographer, another reporter. So we take off. So we go up about 1,000 feet. We circle around. And you're in this envelope, a recent airplane flies, it creates this envelope, and so you're standing there. As long as I didn't move my head or try to stick my arm out, you're just there. And so, okay. Plus, you're not looking straight down because there was enough of a wing in front of you, so it wasn't like peering over, the Empire State Building or something. So I was pretty proud of myself, like, hey, I'm going to do this. This is all right. So we circled, we land, Had the biggest adrenaline rush I've ever had. I have never had anybody shoot at me, thankfully, when I was in the Navy or anything. And it was like, I never threw the pass for the big game. So I was pretty proud of myself that I did this. And then my photographer and his assistants are running along and going, Cary, we didn't get it. And I'm like, yeah. No, come on, you're pulling my. No, we were so entranced looking you up there, the tape ran out and we didn't get it. So I looked down at the pilot and, can we do it again? So yeah, we did it again. And then a rainstorm was coming in, and that second ride was, whoa, finally we landed. So what people actually saw me on television was the second time that I did it. And I've had those things presented to me over the years, and that's probably the wildest one. More normal, exciting place is Clarinda, Iowa. 360 60 days a year. It's a normal small town like you talked about. Most of the storefronts are full. It's a clean, nice little town. They've got some industry there. But 1 week of the year, they pull out all the stops and put on the Glenn Miller Birthplace Society Festival. They have bands from Japan and Germany and Britain and Kansas City and others in Iowa. They have these Japanese girls that come over. And it just becomes the music capital of the world for 4 days, all put on, just like you said, volunteers in the community. They put the chairs up, they take the chairs down. We take over Clarinda High School. Our society bought air conditioning to put in their basketball gymnasium, because this is always in the second weekend in June, and it got hot in there, Well, we bought an air conditioning system for this public high school. And as I said, you meet people who, it's getting lesser and lesser now, people who worked or knew Glenn Miller, but his son and daughter show up occasionally, and other people. And if you like music, and then people have asked me for years, what's going to happen to this big band music? It's alive, sorry to say it's not the popular music of the day anymore, but it's still here. And when you hear those big bands play these great numbers and people like Morgan singing with them and dancing, it's an exciting place.
Well, what I'd like to describe, and I hadn't really thought about this, I didn't make notes on that, but listening to Morgan's experience of doing something really unusual, I realized that probably one of the most unusual experiences I've had was going down in a coal mine. And listening to your comment about the pipe and the claustrophobia, at one point in my life I was doing research on coal mining and interviewing retired coal miners and their wives. And lo and behold, I just happened to meet, this was back in the early 70s, just happened to meet the state mine inspector, who needed to go. Iowa then had 2 underground mines, and he needed to go out to one of these coal mines and do a investigation or a review. And when he heard that I was interested in going along, he couldn't believe it that a woman would like to go down in a coal mine. Well, my husband, of course, heard about this, and there was no way he was going to be left behind. So he and I showed up at the appointed place, at a place called Lake Miami. This coal mine was the Wignall mine, close to Lovilla. And it was probably the most unusual experience I've ever had. We went down on what they call a shaft for about 250 feet, and then you get on a coal car, and the pull of gravity takes you down kind of a slope. And the state mine inspector had quite a sense of humor, and he said, "Now, don't look up, you'll only do it once." And the top of the coal car was clearing the roof about that far. We got down to the bottom, and he said, well, I think the foreman's name was Billy Mitchell. He said, I think Billy can probably show us around, but we might have to sit here a while and wait for Billy to get through with some of his work. We're all sitting on pails turned upside down. And all of a sudden, the most horrible explosion. And I honestly remember thinking, well, I got here, but I'm not going to get out. Dean Aubrey, the mining inspector, had quite a sense of humor, and I would learn later that it was a kind of sense of humor that many coal miners had. Was pretty down to earth and pretty practical, I guess. He knew that they were doing what they called blasting on shift, and he hadn't told us purposely. Well, finally then, after the blast went off and we kind of shook a little bit, then he said, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you here, they blast on shift, meaning they blast when the miners are underground. Well, we spent about 4 hours underground. We saw all of the different apparatuses, all of the different parts of the operation, and it was like a fine-oiled machine underground. It was very mechanized, and maybe the most interesting part, one of the things in a coal mine that they have to do very quickly going underground is secure the roof so that slate doesn't fall down from the roof. So one big machine was in this room. They were just opening up, and they would drill 3 feet up into the ceiling, and then they would put these bolts in. And that seemed to me, for whatever reason, to be almost miraculous that that 3 feet piece of metal would hold up that roof. But 4 hours later, we were back on top side, as it was called. My legs were still trembling a little bit from the whole operation, but it was truly quite an experience. And it was kind of made my husband and I chuckle a bit. About 6 months later, Governor Ray wanted to go down and see a coal mine. But in the interim, the federal government had passed a law saying that you had to have very special status to go underground. So we were able to see the mine, but Governor Ray was not.
Because you're special.
Most exciting place in Iowa, I don't know if exciting is the right word, and it certainly wasn't in Iowa. It was 8,000 miles away, but it was with Iowans. Tim in the introduction indicated that I had been to Iraq a couple of times, writing about soldiers and Marines and airmen and sailors over there. And I did that first in 2003 and second again in 2005. I was there a month each time. And these experiences never occurred to me as being exciting, but certainly interesting, terrifying, thrilling when it was over, mind-numbing when it was happening. I did 4 years in the Air Force and didn't know what it, and was 55 years old before I found out really what it meant to be afraid. I thought I knew, but that trip in 2005, when I was there for a month, there wasn't a day that went by that there wasn't some kind of rocket fire or mortar fire or small arms fire, or worse, these roadside bombs, which went off quite near us. And I was with these Iowa guys the whole time. Excuse me. And when I came back, people asked me, how did those trips change you? And I said, well, it didn't. I mean, I was doing a job. I was a news reporter or a news columnist. I wrote what I saw. I experienced what I did. I had to do this blog they made me do for a month the second time I went. I wrote almost every day. I did a job. It didn't affect you. No, I said, no, it didn't. And then I sat down to answer these questions. And one of them was, I don't know if you're going to ask it, something about your most memorable meal, Iowa meal. It wasn't in Iowa, it was in Iraq, sitting around the floor of an old Iraqi army barracks with a bunch of kids from Iowa having what was called a goat pull. The Iraqis who worked there came in every day. A couple of guys would come to the base every day. Their mom would fix them this meal. You didn't know what it was. Everybody sat on the floor and reached in with their hands and ate with their hands. And So when people asked me, did it affect you? And I said, no. I guess I I didn't lie. I just didn't realize, because so many of these answers made me think of that. And I never, when I wrote the question about the most exciting place in Iowa, for me, the most exciting place in Iowa was in, I think, 2004, when Indianola beat Urbandale in the state basketball championship in Mets on a tournament. Never been so excited in my life in an event. But we start talking about these things we have done, and to be, I just, a couple of instances. One night sitting in a mess hall in Ramadi, Iraq, with a couple of soldiers, and feeling in the soles of my feet a shudder that was in my gut by the time I heard the explosion, and seeing the employees of the place. They weren't U.S. military. They were hired help from third world countries, actually. Everybody running for their lives, and not one of these soldiers or Marines moving a muscle. They try to hit that mess hall every night with rocket fire. If they'd come through the roof, it would have probably killed 200 of them, and me. That night, it hit right outside the door, killed one kid. But I got so afraid I wouldn't go at the mess hall for a couple of nights. And I thought, wait a minute. And I wasn't the only one. You knew that was the target, and so it was exciting when you went to the mess hall. So I decided I wasn't going to go, and then I decided, you know what? I have to overcome that. I have to learn that that's, like they said in The Godfather, this is the business we've chosen. And so I can live with it, or I can let it dominate me. I can let it consume me. I can let it affect my life. It can affect my sleep, my work. Nuts to it. If it's going to hit me, it's going to hit me. And so many of these soldiers and Marines I talked to said that's the only attitude you can have to get through it. Was it exciting when that thing hit? Yeah, I'll never forget it as long as I live. Or when a bomb went off, a roadside bomb went off right near our vehicles, and these Iowa kids, and it blew up this piece of equipment, and we had to turn around and go back, and instead of saying, thank goodness, they blew up a piece of our equipment, we're all okay, we don't have to go back out there, they worked as hard as they could to get that equipment fixed and replaced and go back out there in the middle of the night again to it, because that was their mission. And so that was pretty exciting, watching these guys do that. So anyway, that's... my questions answers are very meandering, your questions, but it's a stream of consciousness that occurred to me as I listened to the other answers. I'll never call it exciting, but I wouldn't trade it for anything that I've ever done in the business. So.
Thank you, John. Reflections and thoughts about the most beautiful place. The most beautiful place you've ever been in the state of Iowa.
Pikes Peak, looking over the Mississippi.
Say it again.
Pikes Peak, looking over the Mississippi. I personally like being on the Mississippi. Any kind of craft. I've been on a Coast Guard boat and small craft. And there's just something about the Mississippi that you know it's world famous, written about. Foreigners come here, and it's an hour and a half from Cedar Rapids, and probably most people from Cedar Rapids go years without seeing the Mississippi unless they're going to Chicago and across the bridge or whatever. And so that, talk about a national treasure and natural place, the Mississippi. And this time of the year, you know, I bet you today there are thousands of people up there leaf looking. I was up there one year, and my wife and I overheard this guy, and he's like, they're doing what? Leaf looking. They drive all the way here to look at the leaves. And yeah, Iowa in fall, Pikes Peak, Marquette. You can go over to Prairie du Chien and look back over. And yeah, Palisades Park, Palisades Kepler, near Cedar Rapids. It's also a beautiful place. As Jimmy Durante used to say, there's 1 million of them in Iowa.
We were up there last weekend, and it's duck season. Did you hear that?
Where?
Up on the Mississippi. Yeah, right. We didn't know that when we went. We were camping. But we woke up and heard it, that's for sure. Kathy?
I think one of the most beautiful, if not the most beautiful, is the area that would be southwest of Balltown, up in the same area. Excuse me, I even looked up the highway. It is about 10 to 12 miles northwest of Dubuque, in Dubuque County. If you're heading up north, you go north to Holy Cross, and then you take Highway C-63 into Balltown. And as you do that, you are on a high ridge, and the land just falls away on either side and just goes on and on. It's spectacular. You see farms, you see crops. In the fall, you see golden cornfields. I think it's the most serene place in Iowa to be up on that ridge, looking out both places. But that to me is it's the most beautiful, and I think the times I've been there, it's been very quiet.
Like Cary said, there are a million of them, and he mentioned the Mississippi River. I will mention a specific place. It's off South Main Street in Burlington, just a hair east. I think it's River Street. There's a couple of big houses there. I've been in both of them, and they both have big porches that overlook the river. A fellow named Man Nordstrom on the house, I recall. And you could set out on this gigantic screen porch with a pair of binoculars and open up, so you weren't looking through screens. You were just looking out, and especially this time of year at the river, you could see for miles. You could see for miles, and there's a railroad bridge there. You might hear a train. You might see a train. You'd see the barges going by, the waterfowl, the seabirds. Their neighbor was a lady named Edith Russell, and her husband was my dad's best friend. He was a doctor in Iowa City, Cappy Russell. And Edith Russell once said to me, I have been all over the world. She said, I have traveled to Egypt, Africa, Europe, South America. The most gorgeous place in the world is on my back porch. And I think she was right. I had the privilege of being there a couple of times. And in the morning, watching the sun come up over the trees, or in the evening as the sun goes down, seeing it hit the Illinois side and all the beautiful leaves. It was just a gorgeous place.
I was once on a shoot in the Luss Hills and got a walking tour from a person who was born and raised in that area, and I thought it was magnificent. But the time that I just thought, gosh, so many people don't know this is Iowa, is northeast Iowa on the upper Iowa River. And I went kayaking with Nate Hogeveen, who is the main guy for paddling in Iowa. He wrote a book called Paddling Iowa, and he now works for the DNR. And we went on an early fall morning, so there was a lot of mist, and on this rapidly moving, clean river with these big, tall limestone bluffs on either side of us. And we really did not talk. We just soaked up the beauty of that place. And around every corner, it was just another beautiful view. So I really was just stunned by the beauty of it all.
I'm going to take the label questions that said at the title of your, highlight on one of your sheets said people. I'm going to give you a choice. The wisest, the funniest, the most compassionate, or the most courageous? Wisest, funniest, compassionate, or most courageous? Could you tell me the story about that person?
I'll take the funniest.
Somebody else could use it too.
Okay. Well, for years and years on Living in Iowa, we had a feature. We always had 3 features. And after the feature, we would have a quote. And the quote was supposed, whether the feature was sad or happy, the quote was supposed to make you smile or laugh. And so we had a whole shelf of quotation books at Iowa Public Television, and we would, we'd spend hours, I'm not kidding you, hours looking for the appropriate quote to go with whatever feature we had. And we kept finding that we kept going to this book called The 637 Best Things Anybody Ever Said by a Mr. Robert Byrne. And then after 6 years of looking in these books and always going to the 637 Best Things Anybody Ever Said, somebody said, "Did you know that Robert Byrne lives in Dubuque?" And we said, "You're kidding!" And so we said, "Well, let's go meet this guy." Well, I mean, it makes me laugh to think about this man because he was actually he was born in Iowa, then went to the West Coast and became a civil engineer. And along the way, he started collecting funny quotations, jokes, wisecracks, and just crazy comments that over the years people have made. And then he wrote the 637 Best Things That Anybody Ever Said. Well, when this book came out, it was so popular that people kept sending him funny things that people had said. So then he wrote the next 637 Best Things That Anybody Ever Said. Well, this man was just kind of like a Renaissance man. He was one of the foremost experts in America on billiards. He wrote a book on cats, on fatherhood, on just crazy things. Anyway, so we went to meet Robert Byrne. He tried to teach me to play billiards, which was a complete disaster. But anyway, he put together these funny books, and these are an example of some of the things that are in his first book. George Carlin once said, "There'll be a rain dance Friday night, weather permitting." Lucille Ball said, "The secret of staying young is to live honestly, eat slowly, and lie about your age." An unknown author once said, "The best revenge is to live long enough to be a problem to your children." I really like that one. Mae West was quoted as saying, "I think marriage is a great institution. I'm just not ready for an institution." Irma Bombeck once said, "Never go to a doctor whose office plants have died." Jack Benny was quoted as saying, "I don't deserve this award, but I have arthritis, and I don't deserve that either." And then Abraham Lincoln said, "If I were two-faced, why would I be wearing this one?" So Robert Byrne, and he just kept us laughing the entire shoot. And when we all went home, we just all kind of went, "Oh," because it was so funny.
Who has another one? Pick a category. Wisest, funniest, compassionate, or courageous?
The funniest person I've ever met is the guy who I traveled the roads with Iowa for, Gary Edwards. He grew up in Spencer and then Des Moines, went to UNI, became a photographer at Channel 2. He looked like a hippie from the 1960s, but he wasn't born in like 1959, so he became a post-hippie. And I can't give you any examples in polite company of the things that he has said or done that has made me laugh. But I literally, and dawn, light bulb came on my head one day of how fortunate am I to know someone who makes everybody laugh, everybody smile, and then still is a professional and gets the job done. And I've been blessed that way, meeting a number of people like that from Iowa who just somehow persevere, and I'm fretting about something, and they're like, "Don't worry about it, it'll get done." When I saw this courageous thing, I think that's the courageous. Who's the most courageous Iowan you ever met? Is where my eye landed when I first pulled this out, and I went, "Ooh, they're getting really serious here." And I had to stop and think about that. Have you ever stopped to think of the most courageous person you've ever met? I did the Jerry Lewis Telethon for 25 years, and so in generalities, I truly have to say, people who have a child with muscular dystrophy, who every day gets them out of bed, picks them up, cleans them, dresses them, put them in their wheelchair, get them on the bus, get them to school, repeat cycle. That night, day after day, for 20, 25 years. I knew couples that got divorced because they couldn't handle it. I knew one mother who essentially gave her child away because she couldn't do it, gave it to her sister. Her sister raised this boy. And, you know, people deal with other diseases, I'm sure. But that is one particular case. And I've heard a lot of people say, Jerry Lewis, you know, he's full of himself. I don't like Jerry Lewis, blah, 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 blah. I said, I don't care. You know, this man's raised, you know, like $3 billion to help people and try to solve their problems or give them ease or comfort in research. And so that's my spiel on that, is I truly believe those folks, the kids who have to, and then go to school and pass their grades and all that sort of stuff. While the other kids are out playing ball or something, they're stuck in this chair. And then their parents who, again, have to see their child, instead of growing and getting healthier, it's just the opposite. They usually get weaker. The one single human being, I think, it truly fits the classical, stereotypical, courageous man. His name was Ralph Nepple. He won the Medal of Honor in World War II from Carroll, Iowa, 21 years old. His guys were pinned down by a German machine gunner's nest. He took charge of the situation, lost both legs. President Truman gave him the Medal of Honor. The city of Carroll, after he came home from the war, bought him a tractor for his farm that he could operate, you know, with his hands instead of feet. And then I don't know if the farm got too much or his situation, but eventually they moved to Iowa City, became a liaison at the Veterans Hospital. I met him in 1984, the year after I came to Channel 2. Soft-spoken. He's another one of these guys who said, no, I'm not the hero. It's the guys who didn't come back. But, and look him up on the web, Ralph Nepple. I think he's the most courageous, singular man I've ever met.
I'm going to, again, if I may add a word, funniest Iowan and clever. And the person who came to my mind, well, a number of people did, but the person that came to my mind, I think it's a name, and emphasize the word clever, is someone who's now, he's no longer living, but the name I think has great recognition, H.R. Gross. And this is the usual response, kind of.
on my dinner list.
Well, he could be on anybody, he could have been on anybody's dinner list. He was a congressman from the 3rd District from 1948 to 1976. He was crusty. He was a curmudgeon. He was described as having a tart tongue, acerbic humor. And a number of years ago, I had occasion to come here to the Hoover. They have H.R. Gross's papers, and to spend some time reading things that he had stated, things that he had written. And I can see why he was such a delight. Now, I'm not sure that he was very much a conservative, very conservative. He was described as the watchdog of the federal treasury. Apparently, he objected to almost every appropriations bill that was introduced in Congress. But he got off some really, really good descriptions. He could do nicknames better than anyone. When NASA landed the first man on the moon, he had objected to the program, he had voted against it. He referred to it as a moondoggle. He didn't like the Pentagon. He didn't like spending all the money for the military. And he would refer to the Pentagon as Fort Fumble. Didn't think much of them. The United Nations, it was a Tower of Babel. Uncle Sam was always Uncle Sap. Eleanor Roosevelt was Lady Bountiful because she was so bountiful with everybody else's money. He kept people He irritated a lot of people in Congress, but he probably did manage to bring the spending level down just a bit. One of the things that he would do every session of Congress, he would introduce a bill. It was called H.R. 144. It was always a general program of fiscal restraint. Well, of course, H.R. stood for House Resolution, or it stood for H.R., his two initials. And a gross equals 12 dozen, or 144. So H.R. 144 was introduced by this man every session that he was in Congress. And a very interesting man to read about.
Nobody's done compassionate, so I'll do compassionate. I'm the last one. Somebody better do compassionate, right? It's a fellow named by the name of Gary Seeloff, and he was, and still is, I think, a chaplain in the United States Army. And I spent a little time with, he was captain, I think was his rank, Captain Seeloff, in Iraq with these Iowa guys. And one time we just sat down and talked one night, just not an interview or anything, we just sat and talked. And he told me about day after day and soldier after soldier who came to him with stories of wives back home announcing they were divorcing their soldier, husbands back home announcing they were divorcing their wife who was in the service, illness back home, despondency, depression. It was every day. And this guy, this young minister, I can't remember if he was Lutheran or Methodist, but the young Protestant minister figuratively held their hands every day and got them through these things. I don't know how he did it. And he would arrange a phone call home when a phone call home seemed impossible. And the compassion that he demonstrated day in and day out without wearing out, himself wearing out, I thought was astounding. You know, I don't presume to think a minister's job is an easy one. You hear these kinds of stories probably more than you'd like, but once in a while. He heard them every day, 10 times a day, and he got these young men and women through it. Compassionate. That's about a mild word as you could put on what he did. So I was quite impressed with him.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you had time to go through all the questions of all of the sheets that were sent to you, but I'm going to appoint you now to that committee that decides the statues that go in Statuary Hall at the U.S. Capitol. We have 2 Iowans honored, if you've ever been through the U.S. Capitol building: Samuel Kirkwood, former governor, and Senator John Marshall Harlan. But now I have for you an opportunity to place a statue of an Iowan. Maybe 2, if you could come up with 2. Quickly run down the panel and tell me who and why.
In recent days, we've been told he's probably fed more people and saved more lives than anybody from Iowa or maybe the U.S. of A., Norman Borlaug. He gave music to the world, and I tap my toe to it to this day. Glenn Miller. And not only that, he was America's musical patriot. Joined the service when he was over age, had children, didn't have to, making $1 million a year. Went overseas to serve and perform for the troops, and lost his life in doing so.
I would have John Lacey, John F. Lacey, a pioneer in the field of conservation, and it's been said that he did more for the protection of wildlife and to stimulate forestry than any other man ever did in our nation's history. As a congressman, he passed bills that saved the last few wild buffalo, prevented the devastation of migratory birds, set up game reserves, and was an early fighter for the national parks. And he was a tenacious fighter for these things that he believed in. And so I would put his statue up there.
Norman Borlaug, obvious. I sat in a committee one time, a group of people, you may have been there, Dorothy, I don't remember, when a bunch of people sat around a table, very important people, sitting around a table in Des Moines deciding who the most influential Iowans are. Remember that?
Yes, we all got a coffee mug, Des Moines Register.
I didn't get one. I said Norman Borlaug, and people, no, he didn't. Norman didn't get very many. He didn't get very big votes. I don't know what it takes, but anyway, so I think that is obvious. I don't know which one of those two guys he should replace, but in the Statuary Hall. The other one would be another fairly obvious choice, and I'm not just saying it to suck up to the people who invited me here today. Herbert Hoover, possibly, is for his humanitarian work. And besides that, putting his statue there would just, all the right people would really get mad about it. So I have another way I like to say that, but it's
I realized, just sitting here through our conversation, and especially our dinner guests that we were naming, that we didn't name any women.
Yes, I did.
Swander and Cloris Leachman.
You did,
Oh, I
okay.
did.
And who?
Sarah Young and
You did.
yes.
Okay, you
mentioned Olive Eye.
And Gladys Blunt.
you did. You get okay. I stand corrected. Maybe I'm thinking me. I only had one. I would leave Samuel Kirkwood, governor through the Civil War, but I would replace Senator Harlan, not because he was not illustrious in his own right, but the person I would replace him with is Cary Chapman Catt. Cary Chapman Catt graduated from Iowa State College. She was the valedictorian of her class. She was the only female. I think there were 17 in that class. And she would go on, and literally for most of her life, she would work for women's suffrage. We take so many of these things for granted today, so many of the rights we have, and certainly suffrage is one of these. She was married to a newspaper man. They lived in Mason City. When they were first married, she had a column in the local newspaper that promoted women's rights. Her first husband died. She then married George Catt, a mining engineer who she had actually gone to college with at Iowa State. And the agreement was that 6 months out of every year, she would be free to work for women's suffrage. And when the final thrust really came in the late teens, she had what she called a winning plan, and it was her plan that finally managed to push that amendment over the top. She was described as an organizational genius, and I think this woman has not received her proper due, and she's the one I would place in Statuary Hall.
Very good. How are we doing on time? We okay on time?
Yes, we are.
Okay. I do want to allow time for this question that I posed to you before we adjourned, or when we came back. I told you we were going to finish up with this, because we couldn't have covered everything that you would like to have covered with the questions, and certainly with the answers. Was there a question that you wish the moderator would have asked? Or do any of the four of you, as it was labeled on your sheet, have a tall tale or pithy advice that you would like to offer to those assembled here? If so, this is your opportunity to do so. Maybe your last one for the afternoon. Dorothy, I thought you would.
I would put this under the category of the wisest Iowans, and I would also put it in the category of one of the most interesting things I've done, and one of the things I've been most privileged to do. When I thought about this question, wisest Iowans, I again came back to not just one, I came back to a group. May seem like a strange group, the Old Order Amish. They are a group of people who are so true to themselves, who are so practical, who to me just really exemplify many of the finer characteristics of Iowans. They're very wise in understanding the kind of life they have to live if that life is going to be perpetuated. Probably an example is to control their own schools. If their children go to public schools, the Amish way of life would not last very long. So I think in terms of wise, the way they live their lives, their practical technology, their serenity of life, I think just as a wonderful example. I have to add an experience that I had. My son was coaching me on this, telling me the things I had to include. He said, "Mother, you have to include this." So anyway, the Amish get an exemption from the state of Iowa in their public school, in their own schools. They can hire teachers who have not been college educated. They are 8th grade graduates. They also can excuse their children, I believe it's at age 14, usually children would go to school, I believe, till 16. If the children are engaged in some kind of manual training, well, of course, they get manual training every day. That school exemption was not given 1 year. I believe it was about 69 or 70. Toby Miller, who's an Old Order Amishman from Kelowna, decided that the governor of Iowa, Governor Ray, needed to come to Kelowna and visit an Amish school to see what a good job the Amish were doing. Elmer, my husband and I had been doing some research on the Amish. We'd been visiting some Amish families. We felt very privileged when Toby Miller drove his buggy, his horse and buggy, to a local telephone stand and called us and said, "Would you come and join us for that day?" So Toby had things very orchestrated. He lives in a huge, huge house. There were Amishmen from other Amish communities in Iowa. They were fed first at 12 o'clock. The governor was to arrive, the governor and his entourage were to arrive at 1 o'clock, and Elmer and I were invited to be there for the dinner at 1 o'clock. The crowning point was, Toby, the first people are fed, they're gone. They've gone to the schoolhouse. The governor, his wife, highway patrolman, they arrive. Toby, with his long, flowing white beard, walks to the door, opens it up, and said, "Good afternoon, Governor. You're just in time for leftovers." It was a great moment. The governor came in, and everybody had a wonderful meal, and then everybody adjourned to the schoolhouse. At the schoolhouse, the Amish children were told to sing a song about Iowa's 99 counties. Well, Governor Ray is a very gracious man, but he had other things to do that day, and he wasn't going to stay very long at the school. The school children started singing this song with one verse about each of Iowa's 99 counties. And the look on Governor Ray's face when he realized he was going to be there for some time. But the exemption was then given, and the Amish to this day are doing very well with their schools, but it was a wonderful experience.
Good story, good story. Anyone else?
Well, one of the questions that was sort of a sub-question said, whose advice and whose memory do you still recall from years past, and who had the biggest influence? And, I mean, like so many people in this world, my parents just had a huge influence on me because of the theater and being raised from the time I was 6 till I was 21, doing theater all summer long in my parents' summer theater, which was in our backyard. But an interesting thing in my mind is that I heard my father say over and over and over, first you got to love something, and then you can love somebody. In other words, find that passion, find that thing in your life that you love, and then worry about the rest of it. Because if you have that thing that you love, you will always have a good life, and it doesn't matter what it is. And over all those 27 years of interviewing people for living in Iowa, person after person had found the thing that they loved. It might be walking through rivers, feeling geodes with your feet, and then saying, wow, this is going to be a great one. Or it might be somebody who had, I interviewed a man once who had 6,000 padlocks in his basement, and about half of them were locked, and he was trying to unlock them. But he was a happy guy. And, you know, it didn't matter what it was. So I think the very best advice that I have seen throughout my life is find something you love, and then find somebody.
There's a book being sold in the gift shop here called Letters to a Young Iowan. It's written a couple of years ago, and I'm privileged to have a couple of pages in it, and maybe some of you folks too. Zach Jack, he emailed me, and I said, is your name really Zach Jack? He's Zachary Jack. And he had this idea to write governors and TV people and horticulturalists and, you know, whoever, to give advice to young Iowans. And some people he never heard back from, and then people like us, yeah, okay. What we've heard today, you won't remember everything that we said, but if there's some young person, and even an older person, buy this book and give it to them, because there's great advice. It's stuff about why you should be proud to be an Iowan, sage advice about, you know, what to look for in life, and just great stories. So I highly recommend that. Since this is kind of a catch-all, one of the questions was, what was your favorite Iowa meal? And mine didn't have anything to do with the food, and it was sort of like our fantasy lunch. Dave Thomas, the founder of Wendy's, came to Iowa City for women's basketball a couple different times, and he was promoting adoption. And I forget how it was tied in with Iowa's women's basketball, but he always had this thing about adoption because he was adopted. So he promoted people adopting children. And of course, Coach Vivian Stringer was the women's coach. And somehow I was in a position of being invited to interview them, and I said, can we have dinner together at Wendy's? So my dinner with Dave Thomas, the founder of Wendy's, and Coach Vivian Stringer. I don't have a whole lot of pithy or funny stories to tell, but I was like pinching myself of, I can't believe I'm sitting here. But the thing I took away from that was Dave Thomas, to some people uneducated because he didn't have a lot of formal education, but he founded this, business empire. And he just went on about the hamburger and how fresh it was and what he put on his hamburger. And then, of course, you have to have a bowl of chili with it. And it's got, real hamburger here in the chili. And then top it off with a chocolate frosty. And it was just like he was describing, the Mona Lisa or something. And I'm just like, this is just too cool, and only in Iowa. Another thing is I've met practically every person who's ever run for president of the United States in the last 30-some years. You can only do that in Iowa. And my final summation here, Your Honor, advice. My advice to you is never follow a Ringling Brothers circus clown when he says, follow me, just do what I do, when he starts walking on folding chairs. And two, don't wake a domesticated American black bear who's napping in December. Because I got the scar to prove it, and I'm not kidding. And that's why my book, if I ever write it, will be entitled Attacked by a Chair and Bitten by a Bear.
John.
I was really hoping you were going to ask the question, what's the most unusual item you have ever seen and or eaten on a stick? And I was going to say mashed potatoes, just to see if anybody... Actually, it's chocolate-covered bacon. But anyhow, I don't. I have no advice, and probably told plenty of tall tales. I have one bit of concern this week. As I read my own newspaper about what's happening with the state budget and all the layoffs, and it's terrible for every family involved. What is getting very little attention, no attention almost, is what's happening at the Iowa State Historical Society.
Yes.
In the historical division, 7 people will lose their jobs. I don't think there's going to be a battle flag project anymore. I don't know. I suspect there won't be an Iowa History Day anymore. I don't know for how long this will go. But and I'm not blaming the governor's office, or the Cultural Affairs Department. They got to do what they got to do based on the numbers that they have. But once that history is lost, it's hard to catch up. Folks talked about George Mills. I knew George Mills very well. We at the paper, when we would write something about state government or something that happened in the past and mention a date or a number, there was always this joke: you better get it right or George will call you tomorrow. And because George called, George is gone. And people like that are leaving us one at a time, and our institutional memory, our state memory, is going with it. Someday Dorothy's not going to be around. And well, no, I mean, it's a fact. And once this is lost, it's lost forever. And I'm really concerned about what's happening at the Historical Society and the long-term ramifications of that. And bless people like Dorothy for doing what she does and what she has done. I mean, we tell stories that people refer to back and all that, but you really you preserve Iowa in people's minds. And anyway, that's my little sermon for the day. But I don't give them very often. So.
Well, how about a big round of applause for this panel?